Hello, Sales Connect. Welcome to New York. Those of you watching the live stream, welcome. Someone want to name that band? That's right, Def Leppard. Why did I choose Def Leppard? For two reasons. One, as Melissa just mentioned, my music taste is still rooted in the 80s, to the disdain and this dismay of my wife and my two daughters. But second is basically that Def Leppard actually represents uncertainty. So we go back for a sec. They represent a band that faced a lot of adversity and uncertainty. In 1984, their drummer, Rick Allen, lost his arm in an accident, a car accident. And he's represented over here on the far right. And this was when Def Leppard was at their peak. They basically couldn't have been at a bigger time. And what do you do when you're a hard rock band and you lose your drummer? Well, what Def Leppard did was they decided to wait and not look for replacement and wait for Rick to heal. And Rick did recover. Rick, through the use of his feet, learned to play the drums as well with his feet and with technology, and he was back playing for the band. And as a matter of fact, he's still touring today with Def Leppard. They're actually on tour in North America, and Rick is playing drums 30 years later with one arm. And so you may ask, what's the point of this story? Well, this conference is about uncertainty. And in the moment of their biggest uncertainty, this band decided to value their relationship with Rick above all else. And this is really something that we all know here in sales and in marketing, right? Relationships are the foundation of our business. They're the lifeblood. And that in times of uncertainty, unfortunately, a lot of our relationships may be fragile at times, and we need to really strengthen them. And so when we think relationships are strong, sometimes they may not be as strong as you think. And so let me tell you a story. So the story starts with this quote. I'm taking down my number this week. Any sales leaders or marketing folks ever hear this happen? Yes. It's unfortunately an all too painful thing, whether it's a rep telling their manager, I'm taking down my number. It's a manager telling their vice president, I'm taking down their number. Or in my case, as a VP, telling our C-suite, I'm taking down my number. And so if we go back a couple years, there was one particular deal that was pretty painful that I had forecasted was going to close. One of those that it looked good. We thought we had the right relationship. It was the right decision maker, we thought. We had multiple relationships, and we thought we were in great shape. And the deal did go down. It just went down in flames. And so I had to go at our forecast meeting and say, basically, we're taking down our number by a couple $1 million. And that's a tough thing to do. And why did that happen? The reason it happened is that it turned out it was a lot more complex with the relationships that we needed to build with this customer. And the decision maker who said, yeah, I've got the authority, I'm going to take care of it, turned out they didn't. There were other people that got involved in the decision-making process. And in the midst of all of this, a few people came in and joined the sales process, and a few people had left. So there's a lot of uncertainty going on. And this is, unfortunately, all too common. This is inevitable. All that happens is sometimes we can reduce this from going on. And many of us in this room, again, experience this all too often. And why? If we're skilled sales leaders, marketing leaders, why can't we just prevent this? Well, the reason is there's a lot of secular trends that are making this happen more often than ever. So the first trend I want to highlight is that there's more decision makers than ever. So historically, it may have been point to point. There's a seller and a buyer, and largely that one decision maker could take care of the business. And maybe it was, for example, say you're selling IT, and you've got your IT person, and they're just constantly buying from you. The problem is there's more decision makers. So now there's a lot more delegation, and there's many more involved, and there's buying committees in many cases. And so we see more people now that this rep has to build relationships with. And so we've seen this number of many of us before. This is CB. They say 5.4 decision makers in a B2B process. And again, in the past, it was a much slower number. And for me, this is actually a conservative number, 5.4. I'd say it's pretty accurate for when you're dealing with SMB customers, but when we're dealing with enterprise, for me, it's often I see 10.4, sometimes 15.4, 20.4. And so if we think the bare minimum is 5 relationships we should have with a customer in a B2B setting, we're going to call that concept multi-threading. We're properly multi-threaded. We have at least 5 relationships. And what's one way to find out if our reps have these relationships? Well, a good proxy is, do they have LinkedIn connections? And we can help with that data. So the question I want to ask you is, what percentage of sales deals in North America are multi-threaded, 5 connections or more? The answer is not too many. As you can see here, only 9%. And if this is a conservative number, 5, this is a big issue. And potentially what's even more alarming when you look at it is 65% are single-threaded. 65%, they're back in that one-to-one, largely relationship. And this is not a good place to be. And yet, this is just if there's one buying group. But what happens is there's also decentralization going. There's a lot more buying happening in different pockets, different divisions, different regions than ever before. So now there's more budgets. And our poor rep has even more people they need to build relationships with, more than ever. And so this makes it even harder. And not only do they have to build even more relationships with these folks, and again, many of them are in groups and divisions that they have no experience or no relationships. So for those of you in tech, you know this very well. Historically, a lot of tech's been bought by CIOs and CTOs, and a lot of that buying is now shifting the line of business or the functional heads. And what do you do if your relationship, that point-to-point, is not your main contact and your competitors are in there? That's an increasing challenge that we're seeing many of our customers realize they have to build relationships outside of where they normally are. And it's not just IT. I mean, it could be whatever other industry. We're seeing it, for example, say commercial banking spread throughout different divisions that they're selling their services to in a company. So now we have even more people than ever, more surface area, if you will, for our reps to cover. And if that's not hard enough, we also have another thing happening, which is there's more turnover than ever. Increasingly, we're seeing the length of time in a role across almost every tenure, every function in the world shrink. And so now you've built these relationships, and now people are coming and going. And so turnover adds a lot more uncertainty already to our sales process. So let's take a look at how much uncertainty there is. So what is the likelihood of a decision maker leaving their position within a year? Let's define decision maker for right now as director level or up. So we're LinkedIn, we have that data, so let's take a look at what the answer is. 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 decision makers are turning over every year. And this really can add that wrinkle to your sales process. If we look at the executive team, what's the executive turnover or head of function? And here we have who's going to last the longest. We'll do a little quiz here. It's VPs of sales, CMO, CTO, CIO. I see some nervous energy, some of the marketing people in the room, looking over their sales leader. Who's going to last longer? Who's got longer tenure? So how many of you think the VP of sales has the longest tenure? Raise your hand. Okay, not too many. Not too many. A lot of nervous laughs on that one. Okay, B, CMO. Wow, very few as well. Looks like a few hands, not too many. C, CTO. Okay, quite a lot of hands. And D, CIO. A lot of hands. So it's funny, most of us here are marketing and sales. We have a number overhead. We're not thinking we have as much job security as our CTO and CIO. And the answer here is, what you can see is the CIO. Those who had D, let's give it up for those who raised their hand on D. Right. But the main takeaway is not that one's lasting 4 months than the other. The main takeaway is these are all about 2.5 years. That's not a lot of time. Many of us are selling multi-year relationships, multi-years. We're not in there and we're out and they're not a customer again. So think about what that means. If every 2.5 years or so, the executive of the line that you're selling into is turning over, and then they're bringing in their people, and you have to start all these relationships over. They're bringing in new priorities. This is a constant swirl that we have in this world. So it's not just, though, about the turnover on your customers. Also, you're seeing turnover with your reps. So let's think about your reps. What's the likelihood of them staying in their role for a year? Well, the answer is 1 in 4, about 25% attrition. It can vary. Some of us in the room may be 15, some may be 30, but it's in this range here, 1.4. And not only is it 1 in 4, but also what's happening is it's also going to increase. Because not for all of us here, but for many of us, a lot of our hiring tends to be as we're doing more inside sales today, more than ever, and sales, many of you have sales dev groups. A lot of the people you're hiring may have less experience. And what you can see here is that the less experience you have, the more likely they're going to be moving on within a year. 38% for 5 years or less. That's a lot of friction in your system, a lot of uncertainty. And it's really expensive. We all know this. When you lose someone, particularly a high-performing person, it's costly not just in terms of hiring them, it's costly in terms of onboarding, and also the amount of time that they're not building pipeline. They have to start from scratch. So for me as a sales leader, it's the biggest cost is the window upon which they can be as productive as a fully ramped rep. And this is a significant number, and in many ways it's far higher than this number. What do we do, or what is the number of deals that are in this precarious state, where you have that single thread, one relationship, single-threaded, and it's one decision maker and one rep? What happens when you combine that turnover? What you get is 40% of our deals are at risk. 40%. We are hanging on by a thread. What do we do about it? How do we strengthen this situation? How do we strengthen our thread? How do we get to a better place and build deeper relationships with our customers? Well, we need to transform our sales relationships in much the same way the internet transformed the way we communicate. I'm going to take you back to an older day, a day before the internet. Some of you in this room maybe have been born or just grew up in school with the internet, so it's life as usual. I was one of those who did not grow up with the internet. I didn't have email in high school. I didn't use the web in high school or college. Right about after I graduated, people started to get email. And so back then, how did businesses communicate within their own firms electronically? How do they communicate with others? Pre-internet, particularly pre-web. Well, it was essentially leased lines, point to point. And what you can see is that it's just from one node to the other, back and forth. And this all sounds good, but guess what? It was unreliable. If there was one break in between this point to point, basically what happens is the line gets severed. And so very unreliable. This was a difficult way to do business back then. And what happened? The internet changed all that. The internet is technically a network of networks. It was built to withstand any one particular piece going down. So if one particular piece goes down along the route, it just gets rerouted. It's packet switching. And we take this for granted today, but this is a huge deal. The internet, remember, was designed to withstand a nuclear attack so that anything happens, the backbone stays up. And every so often, we complain sometimes if we're not getting Wi-Fi access, et cetera. But that's at the endpoints. That backbone, when's the last time anyone's heard someone say, oh, you know what, the internet backbone went down for 2 days. Yeah, I can't go shopping on Amazon for 3 days because the backbone's down. It doesn't happen because it was meant to be resilient, to be fault tolerant. And so we can learn a lot about the internet. So the internet radically transformed the way communication was done to a precarious world of point to point to a networked world. And so when we think about our sales relationships, we can learn a lot from this. How do we in sales go from a point-to-point relationship to get to a more multi-threaded place, to get to a place with stronger bonds with our customers. And the way we can do that is through social selling. Social selling can help, and it makes sense. Social selling is just growing your business through relationships with your customers by using social media, social networking. Social networking is the network on top of the internet, which was the network of networks. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that social networking can help in this regard. And it can help in two primary ways. The first primary way we're going to talk about is it can strengthen your relationships with your customers. The second way is it can strengthen your relationships with your employees. So we're going to have two people's stories that are going to highlight how this happens. And we're going to start with Doug. Doug's an account executive at New Voice Media, a leading call center management software on the cloud. And Doug is going to walk us through how that happens. How did he use social selling in this new world? Well, let's take an account Doug was trying to sell into. Bazaar Voice, okay? Doug's trying to sell into Bazaar Voice. And the first thing you gotta do, of course, is you wanna map out your decision makers. And so he first has a relationship with one individual there, that single-threaded relationship. Let's call this individual Jay. So he's got a relationship with Jay. And Jay's like, I got it. Like, you don't need to talk to others. Like, I'm a champion. Like, I've got budget authority. But Doug still needs to understand who else is involved. He needs to turn these question mark thumbtacks into who these people are. How does he do that? Well, and why wouldn't he? Why do some reps just stop there? Well, oftentimes we're busy, and oftentimes just the technology wasn't there. You know, who wants to go through and pour through historically, job switchboards and trying to find out who's there? Very difficult, or scavenging around on the web. Well, what Doug recognizes, social media's got a lot of that information, particularly LinkedIn, which is a professional network. And so what did he do? He did advanced searches on LinkedIn to really pinpoint who are the key people he needed to meet and understand in this case, at Bazaar Voice. And so how did he do that? Here is a screen of Sales Navigator, which just allows you to have a much more advanced search filters, where instead of just looking at Bazaar Voice, he can dig in by seniority, by function, you name it, years at the company, et cetera. And very quickly, he was able to turn these question marks into real people. So great. So now he has the first step done in a reasonably short period of time. And we're mapping out our 5.4, in this case, far more than 5.4 people. But that's just the start. How does he now get into those folks? Because he's still single-threaded with Jay. Well, what he can do is he can leverage his network to avoid cold calling in and those awkward ways in, and he can use social networking to get warm introductions. So what you can see here is he's got two people from his company that he found have relationships at Bazaar Voice. And he's going to reach out to them and tap them for their introductions. He also has two people in his network that don't work at New Voice Media, that are a former colleague, someone that he went to school with. And so now he sees, okay, I've got multiple people in with multiple different ways to get into different people at Bazaar Voice. And by asking for those introductions, he's effectively able to multi-thread and build out a network into Bazaar Voice. And this is really important, this concept of warm introductions, and doing it over and over again and having your reps do it at scale. You know, one thing that's really been eye-opening for me and our sales organization, again, we need to be leading the way in social selling, given what we do. The number one source for leads for my team, above everything else, all marketing, everything, is warm introductions from colleagues. It's about 30% of our leads are coming from our company's network. Think about that. And doesn't it make sense? Because if you thought about where do you get most of your employees from? Referrals. And referrals is tapping your company's network for great talent. Shouldn't it be the same for your sales relationships too? So how did he do this? I mean, how would he know who in his company has these relationships? You know, I used to work at a large consulting firm where I would see emails with hundreds of people on it say, does anyone know someone at such and such company? We've all been a part of those emails. Well, today, with social networking, in this case with LinkedIn, we can surface that immediately for you. And so, for example, right here is Team Link, and within a minute, Doug finds out who at Bizarre Voice knows anyone who's, say, a director level or up that works at New Voice Media. And so he's now able to multi-thread in. So now that we're multi-threaded in, the problem, though, is remember the job changes and the turnover? But there's going to be job changes. But since he built a strong network into Bizarre Voice, he can withstand those shocks, similar to how the internet can withstand if one node goes down. So guess what happened? Several of his people that he was talking to during the sales process had left Bizarre Voice during this time. And how did he find out? Well, in this case, LinkedIn and social networking, Sales Navigator through his saved leads. He saved their leads in Sales Navigator and he gets alerted. So he knows right away when anyone's come in or left. And here you see 3 job changes. And one person here has entered in to Bizarre Voice, and 2 people in this case have left, and they went to a company called Quantcast. And so he's now able to stay on top of it and make sure not only does he not lose his deal at Bizarre Voice, but now he has some warm leads already into another company, Quantcast. So here we go. So now he is threaded into Bizarre Voice, and he closes the deal. Deal closed. Nice job, Doug. Now there's a bonus, though. Remember we just saw that there's several people he was alerted to went to Quantcast. And so this was very valuable because when someone's new to a company, they're evaluating their first 90 days, what tools and what solutions do they want. And he then leveraged some of those folks who left to immediately build relationships there. And you can see him now multi-threaded into Quantcast. And then he closes Quantcast. As a result of what Doug has done, he's had a lot of success. Doug has gone to their President's Club, they call it Peak Performers Club, 3 years in a row. He also went to something they call 1 Million Pound Club, which is even more exclusive and even higher than their Peak Performers Club. You can see him enjoying his club there in Switzerland. A lot of success. And we've already seen that. We've shared data in the past that reps with high social selling index outperform their peers. They have quota attainment 51% more likely to attain quota, and they're more likely to hit club. And this bears this out with this story. But it doesn't stop there. As a result of all this great work, Doug also went from an account executive to getting promoted as a regional VP. And this is just a great story with Doug, but it's something as well that's been borne out in our data. Last Sales Connect, I shared information that we can look at who's been promoted over time, and we can also correlate that with their social selling index. And those who have a higher social selling index are 1.7x more likely to get promoted. And this number stood pretty constant, whether it was from rep to manager and manager to VP. And here we see it borne out with Doug. And it's not only Doug doing it at New Voice Media. His company's supporting it. They're behind social selling. They're behind supporting him, not just with the tools, but the training and the coaching, so that this is permeating across their company. And what you can see here is that 73% of their revenue has been influenced by LinkedIn and Sales Navigator. It's a wonderful story with how Doug is using social media and social networking to increase and strengthen his relationships with his customers. Let's turn to Amy, who we're going to talk about for strengthening relationships with your employees. And Amy's an SVP. She runs sales ops at Rovi. They just acquired TiVo. Many of you have heard of that company. She also was a senior sales leader at Salesforce. And she's done a lot with social over the years to help her strengthen her bond with her employees. And I'm going to walk you through 3 things that she's done in that regard. The first thing that she's done is she's leveraged her network. And before these tools were much more systematic, she would do it much more manually, but she's been doing it for a long time. She would sit down in her one-on-one meetings with her reps, and they'd literally break out a computer, and she would look up her network and see who she may know and produce warm introductions for them. Today, it's less manual through things like Team Link. Now the reps can just go to her when they have someone that it's surfaced that she has a relationship with. But what's super important, she has a mindset. I am here, servant I'm here to provide my network while I'm at this company to the reps in my field, into the field. And this is so important because reps want to be supported by their executives, by their leadership. Selling is a team sport. And this is one way to really help your reps be not only successful, but feel supported. Leveraging her network. And many of us in the room have some of the best networks. You know, I am often helping my reps 5, 10 a month, where I can easily provide a warm introduction and change the game in terms of them getting into the door of an account they may otherwise not have been able to. So that was number one, strength, leveraging her network. Number two is she's sharing content. And in this case, she shared a piece, she wrote a blog post on the 24-hour challenge to go 24 hours without complaining. That's tough. I don't know if any of you have ever tried that. It's very challenging. And it's something that's really inspiring. As she wrote this post, a lot of her employees actually commented and sent her notes about how they found it super inspiring. And this also is a piece, she actually wrote a book as well, this is a subset of. But it's not just writing a post, which many of us may not choose to do or have the time to do, but it's just also basic things. You know, sharing, literally liking or sharing an article. You know, for example, it's really valuable to strengthen bonds with your employees if you as the executives, they know what you're reading and what things are important to you. For example, you know, obviously we live this at LinkedIn. I know everything largely that our CEO shares. It goes right into my newsfeed. So I'm aware of what he's reading. I'm aware of a couple very basic comments, so I know his angle on things. For example, we just announced a bunch of really exciting things in India a day ago. And Jeff, our CEO, met with the Prime Minister of India. He didn't send out an email. No one sent out an email to all of our employees at LinkedIn. All of our employees just saw it right in the newsfeed. That's how we're gathering information, and we're feeling more connected to our leaders. And it can be, again, just as simple as sharing or liking. For some of us, it's just having a presence. And almost everyone in this room I know has a presence on social media, and LinkedIn in particular. Some of our fellow colleagues and executives don't. And that's a challenge because many employees, they want to feel connected. They want to see transparency. They want to know that your leadership isn't hiding behind something, and they're out there. And you know, Richard Branson's a great example of that. Richard Branson is going to be a keynote at our Talent Connect conference, and he demonstrates this in a very specific way. He's out there constantly letting his company know what things are important, and he's reinforcing his culture. And that inspires people to want to stay and work for them. And many of us are hiring millennials, or hiring people who are digitally native. What does that send a message if you're not showing up where they're largely spending a lot of their time and getting information? So this is a big, big opportunity around sharing content. And then the third thing is to invest in tools to help set them up successfully in social tools. So Amy's been doing this for years, and it's not just things like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, it's all other things about, I don't want my reps to have poor tools. I'm going to invest in them and hold them accountable to do their job. And it's not just her reps, it's also tools that she's using in sales ops that will make her more likely to create better territories and set her reps up for success so that they're more likely to be successful and stay at the company. And so this is a really big deal, and we saw it in the data too. There's a survey that went out to many reps, and what we found is that the top sales reps disproportionately value social selling tools. So 77% of top reps, top quartile, found social selling tools provided by their company either critical or extremely critical to their success. So increasingly, you're seeing the best reps, they want to be armed up with the best tools. They do not want to be using outdated technology or paying for things and bringing them into the work. They want to be supported at their company. I have two other examples of how social selling tools and social selling has helped employees, and these are personal stories. These are two reps on my team, or two folks who've worked in our sales solutions organization. The first is Mac. Mac recently graduated from college a couple years ago, and Mac never thought she would want a career in sales. She had an offer at LVMH. She was going to get into luxury, And one of the reasons she didn't think she'd want to get into sales was that her brother had been in sales and was in pretty much a sweatshop cold calling environment and just hated it, just hated making all those cold calls. And didn't think it was for her. She found that there are organizations like mine that it's very likely you're not going to be doing cold calling. You're going to be doing other things, social selling. And she said, I can do that. That's something I would love to do. I love talking to customers. I love understanding their problems and a lot of the classic things that we do in sales. But that kind of ugly and smiling and dialing, not for her. She wouldn't be in the sales profession if it was largely smiling and dialing all day. And so we are attracting more talent into our field by making the job more enjoyable. That person who is smiling and dialing, that's the minority. Most of us hate doing that. I used to have to do that, and it's not fun. Ben's another great story. Ben unfortunately had a couple of years ago, he had his ACL and MCL go out, and so he had some physical hardships. And then also, as a result, he had back spasms, and so he was laid out for a couple months. And he called me and we had a conversation where he said, thank God for social selling. Thank God we do what we do, because I don't know how I could have done it otherwise. I don't know how I could have pumped myself up when I was in that state to just start banging the phones. I just don't think I had it in me. But I did have it in me is to follow up with warm introductions, to have conversations with executives, to tailor introductions into them. And so we were able to help make him successful in a time that otherwise he couldn't. And that really impacted me. But let's go back now to Doug and to Amy. What Doug and Amy are doing is very different than what many of their competitors are doing. Many of their competitors are still in a point-to-point world, single-threaded, fragile, open to breakage. And they've moved their organizations into a networked world, one that there's multiple points of connection and stronger relationships that can withstand the shock, both with their employees and with their customers. And if you believe that this networked is an end state where we're going to go and it's inevitable, they are generating competitive advantage. Last year I talked about this notion of transient competitive advantage, a term coined by Professor McGrath you're going to have the privilege of hearing soon, which means that there's only a window of time that you can capture competitive advantage before all your competitors are doing. So if we think this networked world is inevitable, similar to how we think of the internet, of what that's done in communication, there's a window, and they have grabbed that window. And it's not just Doug and Amy. Many of you here today, I could be up here telling your stories. You here at Sales Connect, you already recognize this trend. You are the early adopters. You are the early majority. You already get this, but it's not easy. Most of the conversations I have with each of you is, I get it, help us get the others in our organization to rally. So although it may not be easy, if it's inevitable and it's a competitive advantage, you are going to help your company in times of uncertainty build stronger relationships with your customers and gain share. Thank you.